fields. Introduction. The syllabus is quite vast. We'll try and cover it in 2 hours. 4 hours if possible. In that, we'll first today we'll go into the basics of it, and then in the next class we'll try and go into the topics in detail. So today we'll be going for more of vector algebra, how the vectors are added, what are scalars, what are vectors, how is three-dimensional related to, what are the different three-dimensional coordinate systems and all of it. So let us start with that. This is the usual syllabus which is there. A lot of different topics are there. Out of this, the three-phase coordinate system does not appear, but it is used in each and every topic which has been mentioned here. So the thing is that we need to be first very much clear with our basics. Once our basics are clear, then you can easily move towards the details of the things, and then it becomes quite easy for everyone to understand the concepts. So let us clear our basics, and then we'll move to the details of it later on. So the syllabus consists of Coulomb's law, electric field intensity, electric flux density, Gauss law, divergence. Now in this, basically these are related to each other. Once we start with Coulomb's law, electric field intensity automatically comes in. Then electric flux density is related to it. Once we start with Gauss law, then divergence will come in. And similarly, we can continue with electric field and potential due to point, line, plane, spherical charge distribution and all of it. Then the other part comes up is like how capacitance affects what are dielectric mediums which are there. And then Biot-Savart law, this is a different case. This deals with steady magnetic fields. Then Ampere-Circuital law, so Biot-Savart's law, Ampere-Circuital law, and curl, these are related to each other. Then there is something called as Faraday's law is there. Lorentz force is there. Lorentz force is a very important topic, which even if you don't prepare for your exams, it will be easy for you to understand, number one, and it is applicable at a number of places, even in the working of machines and all of it, electrical machines and all of it. So Lorentz force is a very important topic. Then inductance comes up. Inductance as such we have studied in maybe first year, second year and whatever it is. In network theory also it comes up. But the point is we'll go into the basic fundamental of how inductance is created because of electromagnetic field. Then comes up the MMF, that is magnetomotive force. Then the reluctance. Reluctance is similar to resistance in magnetic circuits, and that is what the next topic is. That is the magnetic circuits. Then self and mutual inductance for simple configurations. In this, basically, you can go up to toroids to study how the mutual and self inductance works. Toroids are like springs which are wound around maybe a ring or something like that. So that can be utilized here. And this particular thing is again useful when you go for the study of high voltage engineering and plenty of other things that will come in quite handy. And then comes up the Maxwell's equations. Now these Maxwell's equations are basically divided into different parts for time varying fields, for non-time varying fields, for point form, integrative form, and all of it are there. Maxwell's equations represent a lot of things. In fact, some of the topics that you will study at the top will also again be reflected in the Maxwell's equations. So what Maxwell has done is he has gathered around 4 equations, and those 4 equations are then classified into different forms. Then you have got Poisson's equation, and the continuity is there, so we'll go into it. Poisson's equation is also accompanied by Laplace equation. So we'll go into that also later on. So electromagnetic fields basically lies as a branch of physics. It is an extension of physics, and it has even though the guys who are working on physics may not be working on it, but electrical people have to work on it so that our machines to run properly. These are some of the scientists who are quite prominent when we go for the study of electromagnetic fields. William Gilbert is there, Maxwell is there, his full name is James Clerk Maxwell, Oersted is there, the Ampere is there, Andre Marie Ampere, Michael Faraday. Obviously, Michael Faraday has got his contributions in a number of places. Then Romagnosi is there, Benjamin Franklin is there. Benjamin Franklin actually worked on a lot of principles on physics, which has its applications in electrical engineering. And if you go through the history, you can understand that his contribution is quite immense. Then Hendrik Lorentz is there. He is responsible for that theory of Lorentz force. Then George Gabriel Stokes is there now. This particular thing was not there in the syllabus that I mentioned. The syllabus is what I got from some of the websites. So Stokes theorem is also there, which is as a part of in relation with the Biot-Savart law and the Ampere circuit law. So somewhere down the line that is also there. Then Biot-Savart law was basically proposed by two people. One was John Baptist Biot, and the other one is Felix Savart. So these two guys had proposed that thing. Then you have got Coulomb's law by Charles Augustin de Coulomb. And then you have got Gauss law, whose full name was Carl Friedrich Gauss. And then Lagrange theorem also comes in somewhere down the line. Then you have got Poiseuille's equation, that is from Simon Denis Poiseau. Actually, Lagrange was more of a mathematician, but his applications are his research is applicable into electromagnetic fields as well. Then you have got Pierre Simon Laplace also. So these are some of the scientists. There may be many more. I have listed some 16 scientists who have worked on this field. Why this is important is that first we recognize who have contributed onto the field, and then we move on to the study, so that even someday, if you are free, you can go and study the history of these people, how they were able to formulate these laws and formulas which we use usually. Okay, so that is the introduction part. Let us move to electromagnetic fields, the topic. The electromagnetic fields is basically divided into two parts. One is the electric fields, and the other one is the magnetic fields. So electric fields are basically they'll trace their origin to either electric charges or time-varying magnetic fields. So the electric fields would be generated because of these reasons. An electric field is also called as an E field sometimes, and it is a physical field that surrounds an electric charge. So actually what happens is, for each and every charge, there is some field which surrounds it, and this field is called as the electric field. And because of this field around the electric charge, it exerts force on other charges around it. So if there is a charge in the presence of if there is a charge which is present in the vicinity of another charge, then that another charge experiences a force because of the charge in question, and this charge exerts force on the other charge because it has got an electric field developed around it. Now this field may be in attraction or repulsion depending on the charges. If the two charges are of the same polarity, they would repel each other. If they are with this different polarity, they would be attracting each other. So this is a very simple concept in physics. We all know about that. Then the other part is if the magnetic fields are varying, then also the electric fields may be generated. This is easily demonstrated in the working of the electric machines. Then the other one is, I'm sorry, a little bit the fonts are small, but because of lack of time, I couldn't get into all these details. It's still visible. The other one is the magnetic fields. Now this magnetic field is basically having a direction in it, because the flow of flux will define the direction of the field, and that is why it is also it is also considered as a vector field. Now, the magnetic field is a different field. It is quite similar to electric field, but it has got different component. It works in a different way. So, the magnetic influence on the moving charge can be described through the electric fields, and its effect on the magnetic material and currents, electric currents or electric charges can be affected by. Now, what happens is, like, even if you go into the working of CRO and all the other things, what we can observe is that when a charge is moving in a magnetic field, it experiences a force. There are different laws which will basically define it. If you go into the working of CRO, you can see that whenever a charge moves in a magnetic field, it will experience a force. Usually, this force is perpendicular to its own velocity, and that to the magnetic field. So, different hand rules are there to define the directions. If a particular charge is moving in a magnetic field, then it will experience force which is perpendicular to the velocity and the magnetic field. Now, this itself shows that there are magnetic field which is present in the surroundings. Now, this magnetic fields will be produced by moving electric charges or intrinsic magnetic moments. Magnetic moments are basically movements of the magnets. It's a kind of combination of movements as well as the charge combined with it. So that makes a different effect. This is there as the end part of EMF course. If you go, you'll find that it is there. So, and it is also associated with the spin. Now, what we saw was in the previous slide that the electromagnetic fields are divided into two parts. One is electric field, one is the magnetic field. In some of the references, what the fundamental is that the electromagnetic fields are divided into three parts. These three parts are, the first is electrostatics, the other one is magnetostatics, and the third one is electrodynamics. Now, this electrostatics are basically because of a non-time varying electric field. Means the time varying field in our explanation, what we have considered is both of them. Like magnetic field or electric field may be time varying or non-time varying, right? But if we go for another kind of a classification that we are talking about, that is electrostatics, magnetostatics, and electrodynamics, what we have is that basically electrostatics deals with those fields which are electric in nature but do not have variation in time. Magnetostatics deals with those fields which are magnetic in nature but again there is no time variation. And then the other one is electrodynamics, which deals with the time varying fields. So what do you mean by time varying fields is they are those fields which will vary with time. They don't remain constant. Whereas in electrostatics and magnetostatics, the field will remain constant. Let's move now. Now this is as far as the classification and how the syllabus can be divided. What you saw again in your syllabus can be divided into these parts. In fact, even the three parts where you have got time varying, non-time varying, electric fields, magnetic fields, all this can be considered separately. Now let's come down to the vector calculus, how it works, and then we'll move ahead with it. So what we have here is, first of all, we need to understand what is a vector and what is a scalar. A vector is, a vector is basically any quantity which has got a magnitude as well as direction. And on the other hand, the scalar only has got magnitude. So when we say speed, then it becomes a scalar quantity where we have a magnitude of the speed, but the direction is not specified. It can be in any direction. But when we talk of velocity, then it becomes the direction also comes into play. So the point is that vectors are required in electromagnetic fields. We are not bothered about scalars basically right now, we do require vectors, and vectors are required because the magnetic field is going to have a direction, and we need to see how the effect of these fields will be there on different elements present. Maybe another charge, maybe a group of charges, maybe a formation of charge or something like that, whatever it is. So we want to basically view it. And another thing is when you go for vector calculation, specifically when we are talking about 3 dimension, it is easy to represent, right? And we can visualize it as to how it is happening. We can actually visualize the working of magnetic fields in a given system if we represent it in 3 dimensional system. So that is one of the things. Now before we move ahead again, just because of some time constraints, I couldn't put in the bar on it, but usually the vectors are represented by a bar on top of it. So it should be like here, what we see the diagram is there is a 3 dimensional axis in which V is the vector and it should have a bar in it. Now, how do we represent 3 dimensional system? So there are different coordinate systems which are available. One is Cartesian, one is cylindrical, one is spherical. In fact, there are certain rules which are there. If you follow those rules, you can create your own 3 dimensional coordinate system. The point is you need to follow certain rules which have been specified, and if those rules are followed, then you can easily create your own 3 dimensional system. Now in this figure, what we can see is there is a vector, that is some quantity V, which is in a given direction, and the direction of the vector can be represented by 2 things. One is the magnitude, as we have seen, and the other one is direction. So what we do is we can actually separate the magnitude as well as the direction. The direction is usually given by a unit vector, which is represented by A. Sometimes it is also represented by I in some of the cases. So you can either make use of A or you can make use of I. And A basically represents the direction for the given vector. So when I say AV, it only represents a direction, and the best part is that it has got a magnitude of 1. So when I multiply it with the magnitude of V, I will get exact value of V. So what I can say is that when vector V, I want vector V from unit vector AV, then I'll have to multiply it with the magnitude. If I want to find a unit vector, then I'll have to divide the vector with the magnitude of it. So just we'll just go to how it can be represented. So what we have is, like when I say vector V is there, so vector V is equals to magnitude of V into unit vector AV. So we represent the vectors with bar sign on it. On the other hand, if I just adjust it, what I get is AB, that is y, is equals to vector V divided by magnitude of the vector. This is the magnitude. Okay, just 1 second. Yeah, so we divided by the magnitude, and this is how we can move ahead with the things. These are simple calculations which are there. Okay, so this is how the calculations happen. Now this AV is going to play a very important part, or basically AV is not important. The point is A, that is the unit vector, is going to play a very important part in the remaining part of the lecture. So let us move to the next part. What is a Cartesian coordinate system? We have got 3 perpendicular axes here. One is X, one is Y, one is Z. All 3 of them are perpendicular to each other, and this is how we represent it. Now, what happens is that even these axes will have unit vectors with it. So this is how we represent the unit vectors on it. So the ones in the direction of x will be called as ax. The ones in the direction of y will be called as ay. The ones in the direction of z will be called as az. What we can see is that in a 3-dimension, usually in a 2-dimensional, we have got x and y, and we have got 4 quadrants, which will have positive x and positive y, negative x, positive y, negative x, negative y, and positive x. So these are the 4 quadrants which are there. But when we go for an 3-dimensional system, we have got octants in it. Now these octants will have different configurations: x, y, z, x, y, minus z, minus x, y, z, minus x, y, minus z, so on and so forth. So we can have 8 different octants which are there. Anyway, let us get back to the vectors again. So in unit vectors, what happens is, what we have got is, again, we'll have 3 unit vectors here. The 3 unit vectors are represented by, one is ax, this is in the direction of x, then the other one is ay, that is in the direction of y, and the last one is az, that is in the direction of z. So this is how we represent the unit vectors in a 3-dimensional system, right? 3-dimensional Cartesian system. Basically, this is Cartesian coordinate system which we are talking about, and a combination of these 3 vectors can also be used to represent a vector in the 3-dimensional. Like what I can say is ax plus ay plus az. This will give me a vector in 3 dimensions. I can even have a full vector which can be represented by we can have an example like 5ax and minus 8ay plus 3az. So from here we can understand that when I say 5ax, that means it is in the positive x direction, minus ay with any magnitude, does not make a difference as such, is in the negative y direction, and maybe something in az again points out that we are into the az direction. So which kind of a octant are we working on? Maybe on this side somewhere. This is where we are working on, because on this side, not there. Just 1 second. So what we have is, okay. So what we have here is this is the octant that we are working on, where we have got positive x, positive y, negative, positive x, positive z, and negative y. So this is how we work on. Then we can even visualize the planes which are there. XZ plane can be there, YZ plane can be there, XY plane can be there. When we try to look at the volumes, we can have a cube here where we combine the 3 faces, 3 planes, and we get a volume here. So this is how it can be represented. Then let us move to the cylindrical coordinate system. In a cylindrical coordinate system, what do we have is there are 3 axes which are there. One is rho, one is phi, and the other one is z. In some of the references, this phi is represented by theta. So it depends. Again, the problem with EMF is that in different references, you have got different representations. The same quantity may be represented with different values. Like in some of the references, the voltage is represented by U. Anyways, so let's concentrate here. What we have here is, again, x is there, this may be y, this may be z. So the coordinates now are different. We have got rho, we have got a phi, and we have got a z. Rho represents the radial distance, the direction of the vector in radial in xy plane. And phi represents the angle from, I'm sorry. So what we have here is, we have got a 3-dimensional system where rho is representing a vector on the xy plane, and basically phi. I'm sorry for that representation here. This is x-axis. This is x and this is y. So uh, phi represents the angle that rho makes with the positive x-axis. Okay, so this is how we represent, and then we go by the height. So if there is a point at this position here somewhere, so then what we have is, how do we represent it as rho comes up in this line, rho. So rho will be a combination of ax and ay somehow. But if I have created my own coordinate system that is cylindrical, if we are talking only about cylindrical, we are not considered about x and y, then rho represents some vector on the xy plane, that is a horizontal vector. Phi represents its angle with the x-axis, positive x-axis. So I can represent any vector in this way. If you represent, if you remember, when we move from the Cartesian coordinate system to the polar system also, we have got r and theta. So the formulas will remain the same, the process also remains the same. And then we add another topic to it, that is the z. Now this z can be then, taken up and it can be plotted here. So I have got a z here also. So these three things will be representing the any vector into the system. So again, for this, what we have is the unit vector is represented by a rho, a phi, and a z. It would be better, and I will suggest that you go into the details of these things, because a phi is basically a tangential vector at a given point. A rho we can easily imagine, but a phi means it is moving, right? It is moving from x-axis to the given point. So we have to take a tangent to the cylinder which is formed because of rho, and a z obviously is in the direction of the z-axis. Now what we have here is one more thing. When we look out for the plane, how do we basically imagine a plane into it? The unit vectors are easily done. How do we imagine plane into it? So when we talk about planes, what we have is, let us have a plane is basically generated, because till now it was quite easy for us to understand. Till XYZ was there because it is natural. It's a natural system, but this is not a natural system. So how do we create a plane? We create a plane by basically what we do is we keep one of the axis, one of the value constant, and the other values are changed. So let us imagine how this will work. If we are into a rho, that means the value of rho remains constant, phi can change, and z can also change. So what do we have is, when phi can change, if we only assume that rho is constant and phi can change, then what we have is that the radius is constant and a whole circle can be created if phi changes and rho remains constant. But even if I remove, even then after that we add z into it, the variation of z, then a circle on a circle on a circle on a circle, what we get is a cylinder. And that is why this coordinate system is called as a cylindrical coordinate system. So the surface that we are talking about, when rho remains constant and phi and z changes, we get a plane which is cylindrical in nature. Okay. Then the next one, that is phi. If phi remains constant and a rho and a z changes, then what will happen is we get a radial plane basically. Now what that means is that we will have something like this. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to represent it in the given area, but let me just show it if it is possible. So what we have is, because this is the system, so what we'll have is that phi is constant we get a sphere basically as a part of the surfaces that we develop. And I've specifically taken this particular topic here, this particular image here to show that these are the different kinds of surfaces which are available. Excuse me. Excuse me, just a moment. So basically what we have here is, again, if you just have a look, we have got three axes. One is r, one is theta, the other one is phi. The unit vectors as usual would be ar, right, and a theta and a phi. So here what happens is that phi remains same. R is a different thing. R is similar to rho, but it is in 3 dimension, and theta is the angle that the vector makes with the positive z-axis. So now we have got two angular representations and one magnitude, you can say, where R is the basic direction which connects the given point with the origin. So from origin to that point, what is the direction that is given by R? Theta gives me the angle that it makes with the z-axis, and phi is what it makes with the. So let us try and imagine as to how this particular thing, these are the unit vectors which are there. Let us try and imagine as to how this will basically look out. What I have is this thing, something like that. Suppose this is the point that I have. Now this point, how do I represent? So, R would be in this direction. This is my R. When I want to find phi, what I need to do is I need to plot it down to xy plane, and then with x, I have to find this angle. This particular angle will give me phi, and this angle is going to give me theta. So this is my z-axis, this is my x-axis, and this is my y-axis. So if I have got an R, then I can find, means with R, phi and theta, I can represent a vector in a given system. Right? So this is how we can. So this is how we move around. Then let us imagine the planes. Now planes can be easily visualized here itself, and that was one of the reasons we have taken this image. When we keep R constant and theta and phi, both of them change from maximum to minimum, then we get a sphere which is represented by that red plane. So the plane that we achieve is the sphere. If phi is retained constant, then you get a radial plane as we saw earlier, and what you have is the yellow plane that can be seen. And then if theta is retained constant, now you need to imagine that this phi is basically an infinite plane. It will start from positive z-axis, but it can go on to infinity, because rho in cylindrical and r in spherical can move from 0 to infinity. So that is an infinite, semi-infinite plane, you can say, where minimum value is 0, but maximum value is infinite. Similarly, that will be applied to theta also. The cone is represented here, but the cone can go on till infinity because r can change. So what we get is, when we move the value of phi and r while retaining the value of theta as constant, we get a cone. Now let us evaluate as to what the range of these values can be we had x, we had y, we had z. These are in Cartesian coordinates. Then we had got rho, we had got phi and z in cylindrical coordinates, and then we have got r, theta, and phi in the spherical coordinates. So the point is, what is the range of these values? So x can vary from minus infinity to positive infinity. Y can vary from negative infinity to positive infinity. Similarly, what we said, z can also go in the same way. So rho, since phi is taking care of its angle, rho can start from 0. It cannot go to negative infinity. It can start from 0 and it can go up to infinity again. Right? And then when we go for what we say, theta is basically limited to only 180. It cannot move more than that, because then in that case the angle will change. So when we go for phi can move from 0 to 360, because with positive x-axis I can have it 0 to 360, and you can imagine that the plane can move in all the directions there. When we go for theta starts from positive z-axis, it can go to negative z-axis. So even if it moves a little bit, again the angle will repeat. So theta can have only values from 0 to 180. So just let us summarize it again. X minus infinity to positive infinity, y same, z same, rho 0 to infinity, r 0 to infinity, phi 0 to 360, and theta 0 to 180. So this is how the values can vary, and this is very important, because when you are going for your calculations, you need to make sure that these values are not being offended. In case if it is happening, then that means that your calculation is wrong. Okay, so then let's move to the next slide. Then let's move to the vector algebra part. In vector algebra, what happens is, it's a simple, it's not the simple addition, but what we have is that we add the direction as well. Okay, so when we move to the addition of vectors, what we have is that, like here, A is a vector, B is a vector, and C is a vector. So when I add A to B, you need to also add the angle. Only the magnitude cannot be added, but we also have to add the angle along with it. So this is how it is represented. When we say A plus B is equals to, see, all these are vector, they need to have a cap on it. So anyways, so A plus B, in this what we have is we are also adding the angle, and that is why it's not like C is equals to magnitude of A plus magnitude of B. This is not the case. It is angular addition which is happening there, right? Because A plus B is equals to C is what I get. Now what about vector subtraction? When you go for vector subtraction, you cannot subtract it, because you have to go, you can only do addition in vectors. So what we do is, when we say C is equals to A minus B, we actually write it as then A plus of minus B. Here it is visible. So what we do is, we say C is equals to A minus B. If I want to write it in a vector, then what I do is I actually put it as C is equals to A plus of minus B. And how do we represent it as? See, A is there, we have got a B here, okay? And this B is in the positive direction. So when I want to put it in the minus B, I'll have to reverse the direction. That is how I get the negative B. So once I've got the negative B, then what I do is I will go for addition of A and minus B. So from here what we get is, even subtraction is also an addition of vectors. The direction of one of the vectors has to be changed. So what I do is A plus of minus B, I get the vector C here in this case. Now in vector addition, it is cumulative, that is A plus B is also equal to B plus A. It's not an issue. The direction and the magnitude of the output will remain same. It is also associative. Associative means I can write it like this: A plus B in a bracket plus C is equals to A plus in bracket B plus C. So this is associative also. So the addition also follows this particular rule. Now, for you, what you can do is, as students, you can try out whether this particular thing is applicable to the vector subtraction also. As an exercise, you can just go for that, so that you will be in a position to understand as to how the things work out. Now, this is a simple representation which I have shown for all the three cases. The first one is for Cartesian, the other one is for what I say, cylindrical. I'm sorry, this should be 5 here. Okay. Yes. And the third one is for the spherical one. So this is how we do represent it. But these vectors are not same in space. 3ax plus 5ay minus 8az is a different vector. 3 rho plus 5a5 minus 8az is a different vector. And the last one is again a different vector. All of these are different vectors in space when we imagine it. Okay? But yes, I would suggest that whenever you've got a time, you try and visualize these things as if 3x plus 5ay minus 8az, how that vector will be seen. If I go for these things, how it will be seen and how these will be seen. We have gone a little bit faster in this case, but if you go into the basics of it, you'll understand how these vectors are formed, specifically in cylindrical and spherical. Because in Cartesian, it is quite easy. You can easily imagine I can go by 3 units of x, 5 units of y, and negative, 8 units for az, and we get the vector. So that is very simple when you go for Cartesian representation, but when we go for cylindrical or spherical, it's not that easy. So it would be better that you try and understand how it works out, how phi can be extracted from this particular thing. You have got formulas for it. It's quite simple. If you have got a point is given to you, you can find the vector. If the vector is given to you, you can find the point as well. Right, so the formulas are available at plenty of spaces. You can just try it out. The point is, my idea is that you need to visualize how these things will basically appear in space. If you are able to do these things, then it will be very easy for you to move ahead later. Okay, and understand the remaining things. Then let us go to the next part of it. We have seen addition. Let us see the product of it also. How can we have the product of the things going around? Then there are 3 kinds of products which are there in this. One is the scalar product, one is the dot product, last one is the cross product. And these are different kinds of products which are there. In a scalar product, what we do is we multiply the vector with a scalar quantity. Scalar quantity means a magnitude. So if I go in this way, what we have is that in this example, what we can see is that Z is a vector. I have given it by bold. F is a vector, and I am multiplying F with a scalar value of A. So we can say we have taken an example for that also. 5F. So suppose if F is 3ax plus 5ay minus 8az, I am multiplying it by 5. That's it. So what I get it is a very simple output, that is 15ax plus 25ay minus 40az. So this is a very simple calculation, scalar product. This may happen at times specifically, and the better part is that it is also distributive in nature. Distributive means distributive means if I put it as like this is a scalar, suppose, into b plus c, where b and c are vectors, then I can write it as a into vector b plus a into vector c, and vice versa. The reverse is also possible. The other way around also is possible. There is another way of representing this distributive nature of the system. That is, if I have got a plus C, where both are scalars, into vector B, then I can say A, it can be equated to A into B plus C into B, where B is the vector only. And the reverse way is also possibility. So this is the distributive property of scalar product which you can follow. Then it is also commutative. Commutative means if I go for a vector into a scalar, then it can also be written as this way. It does not make a difference. And then there is one more very interesting thing that you need to explore. What if I have got something like this? B divided by a scalar quantity. The topic itself should give you a hint. What should I do with it? Okay. Since it's a virtual class, we cannot wait for answers. So let me assume. So this can be written like this: 1 by A into vector of B. So this is how I can represent the division as well. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. This was quite easy. Let us move to the dot product. The dot product is really very interesting. Okay. Dot product is multiplication of two vectors. Okay, multiplication of two vectors gives me a dot product. And the formula for it is when we go for dot product A into B, then in that case, what we have is excuse me. When you go for a dot product, what you have is the calculation is done in this way. You multiply the magnitudes of the vectors themselves, and then you multiply them with cos theta. Unfortunately, we don't have that much of time. Otherwise, I would have taken an example for dot product. It's quite simple, and you can easily go ahead with it. So the point is, when we are going for a dot product, what we have is excuse me. What you have is basically that to find the dot product, you multiply the magnitudes of the vectors along with the angle between them. It's a very simple calculation in this way. The other one is what you get as an output of the dot product is basically a scalar. Okay, and then let us move ahead with it a little bit. These are some of the special cases that we have, and that is why I didn't take the other example also. I'll show you the other example also as to how the calculation is done. Okay, so now what happens is when we have, like, if I multiply the same vector twice, means I want to find the square of it. That is what I'm doing is I'm basically making a dot product of the same vector, then the output should be scalar. And that output is nothing but the square of the magnitude of that particular thing. Then if I multiply two vectors to a dot product, you have to put a dot in between to show that you're taking the dot product. Okay. So if I multiply two vectors to a dot product whose angle in between them is 90 degrees, then in that case the output of the vector becomes 0. Now here you need to understand one thing again, which is very important. How do we calculate the angle? The angle theta is the smallest angle between the two vectors. Okay? I'll again repeat, theta is the smallest angle between the two vectors. Okay, so it cannot exceed a certain limit. So now what happens is, like, if I have both the vectors at 90 degrees to each other, then the output of the dot product will be 0. You need not calculate it. Like if I multiply ax, that is the unit vector along x axis, and if I multiply ay, that is unit vector along the y axis, then the output of that will be 0. I'll just put it here for you to see. Ax dot ay will be equal to 0 because the magnitude is set aside here, the angle takes the precedence, and if I multiply them, then ax dot ay will be equal to magnitude of a. This can be equated to like this: magnitude of ax, okay, into magnitude of ay into cos theta, but that cos theta is equal to 0. So this may be equal to 1 into 1 into 0. That is equal to 0. So any of the axes that I multiply with each other, you get it as 0. X multiplied x dot product of x and y will be 0. Y and z will be 0. X and z will also be 0. However, if you multiply both vectors in the same direction, then you need to multiply the magnitudes only. So if I just remove this thing, if I remove this thing here, then let us see how this thing will, I'm changing the vector now, and let us see how it affects it. So what I do is, if I take a dot product of ax and ax, both are in the same direction, so this will not be equal to then 0. And let us see how it can be calculated. It will be ax into cos theta. That cos theta is nothing but cos of 0, because both of them are in the same direction. So if both of them in the same direction, then cos theta will be equal to 1. Sorry. So what I get here is, now what I get here is cos theta is 1, I get the output as 1. So I have multiplied the magnitude was 1 into 1 is equal to this thing. So this is how we can go about it. Theta is equal to 0 if the angle between the two vectors is 0. If the angle between the two vectors is 180, then in that case what we get is the negative of the product. Okay. Now, based on the same thing, what happens is, this also means, from these cases, what I get is that ax into ax will be 1. That is a possibility, but if I multiply ax into ay, it will be 0. Ax into az will be 0. Similarly, it will be applicable to the other thing. So that is why the dot product is also given by these values: ax bx plus ay by plus az bz, where this vector is equals to ax into this thing plus ay into ay plus az into az. So ax, ay, az, small ones, these are vectors in unit direction, and these are the magnitudes in that direction. So if I represent like 5 ax minus 3 ay plus 8 az, so what I have is 5, this is 5, this is 3, this is 8. This is how we can represent it. Similarly, that will be applicable to the vector b also. So this particular formula is what we actually implement when we calculate the dot product. You can implement the other one also, which we have given, that is the base formula. But while calculation, it is better that you make use of this particular formula. Okay, let's remove all these things. Okay, let us move ahead. I hope I am clear. If there are any doubts, please ask. So this is another thing again, that the dot product is commutative, and it is also distributive in property. Commutative means a dot b is equals to b dot a, and distributive means a dot b plus c is equals to a dot b plus a dot c. So up till here, I hope I am very much clear, because we are diving into the details of things now, and there should be some concepts which should be clear in your mind so that you can understand these things. Then comes up the cross product. The cross product is basically different kind of a product which is there, and it is represented by magnitude of A into magnitude of B into sine of theta AB. That is, the angle theta represents the angle between vectors A and B, and it is the smallest angle between A and B. And an is a vector which clearly indicates that the output of A cross B should be a vector. Now, an also stands for that it is normal to the direction of A and B, the plane containing A and B. If there are two vectors, the chances are that they should be a part of a plane, and if that is the case, then in that case, an should be perpendicular to both of them. Okay, so let us see now how this particular thing is evaluated and how we go about it and what are the classic conditions. So these are the cases which need to be understood. The first thing is that A cross B is not equal to minus of B cross A. Okay. Minus of A cross B can be written as A cross minus of B, and A cross B cross C is not equal to A cross B cross C in bracket. So this can be easily understood, I think so. So now again, when you multiply the normal with the vector, the cross product, then you get a 0 in that case, and sorry, the normal, that is an that we have, if you find the dot product with the vector here, it will give you 0. Like if I go for, sorry, like if I take this an and I take the dot product of this and this, you will get a 0. Dot product of this and this, you will get a 0. So that proves that it is perpendicular to both of them. The value of theta can vary from 0 to pi. The last two equations here show that the cross product is not associative, but it is distributive in nature. Okay. If theta is 0, then you get the cross product also as 0. Theta means both are in the same direction. If both the vectors are in the same direction, then your value of cross product will be equal to 0. That means you don't get an output. This is the actual calculation formula for it. You find the determinant of a matrix having ax, ay, az, that is the unit vectors in x, y, and z direction. And the second row and the third row gives the magnitude of the vectors, as I showed in the previous slide. So it gives the magnitude of the direction. Sorry, magnitude of the vector. So this should be all as far as I believe cross product is considered. Let us move into how we move from Cartesian to cylindrical and cylindrical to Cartesian to spherical and all of it. So this is the formula, because there should be some relation into it. That is why the formula is like this, and we need to learn this by heart somehow. The similar kind of relations are also given if you have a study on it between ax and a rho, ay and a5, az, and az obviously remains the same. And you need to remember them by heart, because when you go for actual calculations later on, when you are studying the laws and implementing it, and when you go for implementation of those things, then you need to understand that how ax, a rho are related to each other when you go for a dot product or any other kind of a thing. So those relations are specifically mentioned at multiple places. Wherever you study electromagnetic fields, you will find those tables included, and that is why I have not taken it here. Because of some lack of time also, I couldn't consider it here, but the point is that it will be better that you go through it for better understanding of electromagnetic fields. So x is equals to rho into cos of phi, and y is equals to rho into sin phi. So if I have got a cylindrical point, I can convert it into Cartesian using this formula. If I've got a Cartesian point, I can convert it into a cylindrical point using the formula on the other side. So rho is equals to under root of x square plus y square. So you can say it's a kind of combination of both of them. Like we go from polar to Cartesian to polar. That same formula is applied here. Phi is equals to tan inverse of y by x, okay, and z is equals to z. So in both the cases it remains the same. This is how you move from Cartesian to cylindrical. And then when I move from Cartesian to spherical, these are the formulas: x is equal to r sin theta cos phi, y is equal to r sin theta sin phi, and z is equal to r cos theta. On the other hand, r, theta and phi are given. Theta has got some other formulas also. You can just go through it, and like one of the extension is z by r, cos inverse of z by r, because r is already defined there. In some of the references, you'll find that r is also represented by rho in spherical as well. So it becomes a little bit confusing. But you need to be aware of it. So how do we distinguish this? If all the values are normal, then it is a Cartesian system. If there is one angle present in it, then it is a cylindrical system. If there are two angles in it, then it is a spherical system. No matter how it has been represented, it does not make a difference. Okay? Let's move ahead then. And how cylindrical and spherical are related to each other. Phi remains the same. Rho and z are given. So this is how you can move around. I would suggest that you learn it quite well. Otherwise, this becomes a problem for you later on. If you are not good with the and refer these things, it's better that you either put it at some place which is easily accessible in front of you, or better you learn it by heart. Then let us go to the final topic for today, that is the Coulomb's law. At least for the introductory part, we can assume it and then we can move ahead, because the point is the remaining part of the syllabus we will try and cover it in the next class. So Coulomb's law was basically proposed in 1975. The scientist behind it was Charles Augustin de Coulomb. You just saw his name somewhere in the list of scientists who have contributed into electromagnetic fields in the earlier slides. Then the statement it says is, the force of attraction or repulsion between two charged bodies is directly proportional to the product of their charges and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. Now this is a scalar representation of the Coulomb's law. Again, we'll repeat it. The force of attraction or repulsion between two charged bodies is directly proportional to the product of their charges and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. This leads us to the formula that force is proportional to Q1, that is the first charge, and Q2, that is the second charge. Okay, product of them, and inversely proportional to the distance between them, that is R, represented by R. But this formula is only by representation. So let us move as to how it will be actually represented in time and space, and let us work out. So the Coulomb's law is represented in scalar format in this way, where magnitude of F, what we saw earlier was the magnitude, that is what I said, it is a scalar quantity. Magnitude of F is equals to K into Q1 Q2 by R square, where K is the Coulomb's constant, and it is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. So what we get is the magnitude in the scalar format, where the direction is not specified. Even R is the magnitude of distance between Q1 and Q2. It is not it does not carry the distance between them. Okay, and then what we do is that in this case the K is the Coulomb's constant, which is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, and epsilon naught is the electric constant. So the value of K based on these things is does come out to be 8.988 into 10 raised to 9, and the unit for K is Newton meter square per Coulomb square. Now in this case, if the product of Q1 and Q2 is positive, then the force between the two charges is repulsive in nature. If it is negative, then the force is attractive. So what we are saying in the diagram also, F1 and F2, if the value of F2 is F1 is negative, that means it is in this direction then. If F2 is also negative, then it is in this direction. So the point is that the direction will be given by the magnitude, in this case by positive or negative. But let us go by the vector representation. That will be very much easy for us to also understand as to how it will work, isn't it? Because scalar is not so much helpful for us. The magnet, we are into three-dimensional system, and we need to understand how it is represented. So what we do is we multiply the scalar format, this one with a vector in that direction, and we also add this thing. So what we get is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1, which is the magnitude, q2, which is the magnitude, divided by r square into ar is the vector from one charge to the other charge, and based on what charge I am trying to find the force, ar can be changed from ar12 to ar21 also. Okay, so now ar is basically represented as unit vector ar divided by magnitude of it. This should be I'm sorry, that ar is added into that. So what we do is ar is represented as here, sorry, wrong place. Okay. So what we have is what we have from here is that this thing can be carried forward as it is. Okay, so 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2. Now this ar is represented by vector r divided by r magnitude, but this r is also magnitude, so what we get is r cube into that. So that is how this particular formula now comes in. So you have got q1 q2 by 4 pi epsilon naught, because 1 can be removed. This is the vector r, and this is 3 times, not square as it can be seen earlier. So it is cube, and that is how you move ahead with it. Okay, I'm sorry, in the third part there's something wrong. It should be cube. So this is how it is represented. This here should be cube. Okay, so this is how we can move ahead with it, and then let us move to the next slide. Then the Coulomb's law works out. Now one more thing is you need to understand that it is directly proportional to the magnitudes of the charges q1 q2, both of them. It is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. Okay, so the force is working in that way. And let's move to the next slide. So this is when we go for a distribution of charges. Okay, when we are into a distribution of charges, what we get is we are adding up all the effect of all the charges onto a given charge, and you find the total charge onto it. So this particular thing represents the addition of it. So if I've got a charge, one charge, this is my reference charge. So suppose I represent it with R. This is my other charge. It is a very simple thing, a simple formula which we saw in the last slide can be implemented, and I can find the force on this. But what happens if I've got multiple charges? So what we do is we go by the superposition thing. We take one charge at a time, and we find the force of that charge on this particular charge, which is the reference charge, and then we repeat it for all the charges, and we find the total force of it. We sum it off, we sum all of it, and we find the total thing. So this is what this particular formula represents for us. Okay, so you can say that superposition can be applied under the Coulomb's law, and it can be extended to any number of points, right? So this can further be then extended to how the a line of charges will affect a particular charge. Plane of charges can affect a charge, so on and so forth. So we can go by that in that way. Okay, and how a system of charges can be represented. This is a very important topic in case if you want to go for some signal analysis and all of it in future. The individual forces are what we are trying to do. The point here is again that we usually assume that the system is having a vacuum, otherwise you have to change that epsilon naught to the system. Okay, rest everything I think is self-explanatory in the slide. Coulomb's law needs to satisfy these conditions for it to be implemented. The conditions are the charges must have spherical or symmetrical distribution. Okay, the point charges should be spherical in nature. That is what we assume usually. The charges are normally not represented as a cube. Maybe a combination of charges may be represented as a cube, but individual charges are taken as circular in nature, spherical in nature. Sorry. The charges should not overlap each other. The two charges cannot be placed at the same point. The point charges or the charges whichever we are considering should have distinct positions, and it is obvious two charges cannot be present at the same position in a what we say in a given physical space. Two charges cannot exist at the same position. Okay, so and the last point is that the charges must be stationary with respect to each other. Okay, so they should not be moving, because right now we are not talking about time varying fields, we are talking about stationary fields. If we are talking about stationary fields, then the charges should not keep moving around. Okay, and then lastly, just before we finish up with the Coulomb's law, this was the last topic for today. We'll continue with the remaining topics later. Let us go for one numerical. This is a very simple one. There are three objects placed in this way: 5 coulombs and -4 coulombs and -5 coulombs. You need to find the net force on the object of 4 coulombs. Here you need to find it. So there would be two forces which would be acting, as we have seen. There will be two forces which would be acting onto it. One would be because of -5 microcoulombs, another one would be because of 5 microcoulombs. Why I have taken this numerical is reason is that this particular thing is again used when you go for derivation of line charges, electric field because of line charges and all of that. So you need to be a little bit used to all these things. Okay. So there would be two forces acting, one because of -5 coulombs, one because of 5 coulombs. Now, because of -5 coulombs and because of 5 coulombs, the forces would be in this direction. This F2 is because of -5 coulombs. Since both were negative, it is in the opposite direction. They will repel each other. So the line connecting this will be extended to give me F2. But -4 microcoulomb would be attracted towards the 5 microcoulomb because both are having different polarities. And then that is why what we have is that F1 will be in the direction of 5 microcoulomb. The resultant force will be somewhere here, addition of F1 plus F2. I have to do like this and I have to go by this thing, and somewhere I'll add it up and I'll get the final F. So this is how we calculate the forces. The formula to be, just 1 second. Okay. So the formula to be used is this one. For both the cases, you'll find F1, you'll find F2. In one case, you can keep Q1 as constant as -4 microcoulomb. Q2 can be at one time it will be -5 microcoulomb, at the other time it will be 5 microcoulomb. K, you need to add a vector to it. Vector will give you the direction as well. The vector will be the distance which we have mentioned here. If the 5 microcoulomb is at origin, okay, sorry. If 5 microcoulomb is at origin, then you can find this, and you can find the direction. The value of F1 here, this one, comes out to be probably 4.5 Newton. You can do the calculation, and this comes out to be around 2.3 Newton. The total F comes out to be 3.3 because both are in the different directions, and the angle comes out to be around 209. So, sorry. So the angle has to be taken into consideration because here I haven't mentioned the angles. You need to calculate the angles also. So that would be all for today. Thank you.